Hello, I'm Sean Richards of Not a Yes Man's Economics, and today I want to talk to you about the economic situation in Japan. Why am I doing this? On two counts actually. The first is that Japan has been a leading indicator, a forerunner, if you like, a reconnaissance soldier for many of the economic policies we've seen in recent years. And bringing that to today, we've seen some weak economic numbers out of Japan. We've had trade figures in. Why were they poor? It was trade with China. This matters for Japan because we think of it as a trading nation, surpluses. It's not that unusual for it to have a deficit in January because of the timing of the Chinese New Year. But the size of the deficit this time round was an issue. And that adds to the fact that if we look at Japanese economic growth, the economy shrank in the second half of 2018. Over 2019, in the year to the fourth quarter, it didn't grow at all, zero. Or as the Japanese statisticians put it, minus 0.0%. Make of that what you will. What that does, if we look at the sort of general background of a world economic slowdown, and we see that that's applying to Japan, is that that leaves them with a problem. Because in terms of monetary policy, the Bank of Japan is operating just about everything. What I mean by that, for those that don't follow it, is it has negative interest rates. It has what we call quantitative easing, although it's called QQE in Japan because they had to change the name because it failed so often. So they buy Japanese government bonds on an extraordinary scale, somewhere around 473 trillion yen's worth. They buy corporate bonds. They buy commercial paper. They buy commercial property. They also buy equities. In fact, they're buying so many equities via exchange traded funds that they're in danger of running out. I don't mean buying the whole market, I mean buying the exchange traded fund sector. Last time I checked, they owned about 80% of that. This whole wide spread of action was supposedly designed to raise inflation. They think that's a good idea, I don't, but let's just park that. Reduce the value of the yen, and Japan would do better. Except, there's been loads of so-called policy initiatives like this, is that the situation remains more or less the same. Not much growth, actually not much inflation either, even at times when you think there might be some via higher oil price or the yen falls. It tends not to gain any real traction in Japan and fizzles out. The reason of them being a forerunner though is that we now wonder if the Bank of Japan will expand its policies more. For example, there's been discussions over the last day or two about it maybe buying even more of the equity market. And that's something I want you to think about because in other parts of the world, there's a bit of humour about what's called a plunge protection team. For example, when the US Treasury Secretary spoke to some of the US banks around about New Year time, that's a sort of idea of an implicit one. In Japan, there is an explicit one. The Bank of Japan buys shares on down days. But what more can they do, is my point here. And also, there's a signal for us. If the economic slowdown goes further in the UK, Europe and the US, well, they do the same, buy equities, buy commercial property, in a sense, buy. But returning to Japan, there's a deeper issue for us because there are now suggestions it needs to do fiscal policy, and by that I mean more fiscal policy because it already had a deficit. Talk of debt monetisation, but this is from the same person who said that the previous moves would work. And if they had, we wouldn't be here, would we? So there's a whole range of things that are impacting here. But let me look at this from another perspective. Japan has an ageing and indeed shrinking population. There's some forecasts that the workforce will be 20% smaller in around 20 years' time. My suggestion would be, rather than this forever trying to find some sort of monetary cure, is to adjust to that fact. Maybe sometimes the economy won't grow so fast or even shrink a bit. But rather than continually trying to force things and splash money around everywhere, it would simply be better to try and accommodate that, make the reforms you can, look after the old as best you can, and simply move on. After all, fewer people are supposed to be better for the planet, aren't they? Thank you.